Namaskar, everyone. Thank you. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatar-varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram. So welcome everyone. So you may remember I discussed. It's all clear? All of you clear? Okay, just one thing. So clear now. We were discussing a very important aspect of Indian philosophy and Hindu spiritual tradition. That is, all the different religious scriptures in Vedantic or Hindu tradition are not equally authentic or not considered to be equally authentic. This is a very important point, remember. And this is especially relevant when we remember that there's some religious traditions which consider every word, every comma, every statement as a revelation from God. There is an inherent problem because many of these ideas must have originated perhaps several centuries ago, and they must have had some relevance in those days, maybe 1400, 1500 years, we don't know. And world has changed, human civilization has changed. So if you apply them in today's conditions, it can create very, very serious problems, ethical problems, problems of interreligious conflicts. All can happen if you consider every word in every scripture, or even in the most fundamental scripture, if you consider every word as divine. There is a big problem. It's almost like a time bomb. So that's why I stress this important point. The number of canonical works in Hindu tradition will run into thousands. You have just to visit British Museum Library or the huge manuscript libraries of India. Not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands books. And there are any number of manuscripts which have not yet seen the light of the day, not yet published. They are still in manuscript form. If you consider every word of all these books as relevant for all time, for the whole humanity, it is a terrible problem. So Vedanta will tell you that according to Vedantic tradition, there are certain statements in the Vedic literature which are universal, which are humanistic in a very broad sense, which are relevant for all times because they are concerned with questions of human life and the fundamental problems of human existence, not of one nationality, race, or religious group. That's so I can give you here a definition of Vedas by Shankaracharya. This is considered to be the most fundamental and important definition of what Vedas are all about. Because if we go to temples all over India, or even now in Bay Area, everywhere you find, they are chanting all these books. Many of these books, many of these mantras, they're chanting are prayers. Prayers for job, for money, for wealth, for children, good bank balance, all those things, health, and so on. Are they relevant for all times? Are they relevant for the whole humanity? Are they concerned with the fundamental questions of the meaning of human existence? Not necessarily. So Shankaracharya definition is Atra Rigadi Vedaha Tat Pradipatyartham Vicharam Kurvanti Idi Vedakhyam Avapnuyuhu Athava Sadbhavam Sadhayanti Idi Vedaha Athava Brahmadinam Paramatmanam Labante Idi Vedaha. And this is a definition of Vedas by Shankaracharya in the Sanasujadiya Bhashya. Bhashya means a commentary that he wrote on the well-known book. It's not part of the Upanishads, but as important as the Upanishads, Sanasujadiya. But it means, it says Vedas. I mean, the essence of Vedas. What is the essence of Vedas? Vedas discuss the reality of Brahman. Vedas try to establish the fact that there is one divine spark in all of us, in everyone, and that is an omnipresent, uh, immanent, transcendental reality. And they talk about certain spiritual disciplines which anyone can and should practice. For example, a sense of renunciation of lower things and sense of, let's say, adherence to higher values, and then self-restraint, self-control, in a serenity, contentment, peace, and a strong urge for higher spiritual values, plus yamas and niyamas, which are already described in the Yoga Sutras. They're also included. I mean, non-violence, contentment, non-possessiveness, purity of life, and then connecting with higher ideas. These are meant for everyone, even for non-believers. So there is a higher definition of spirituality that goes beyond religion. This is from Shankaracharya. So if you want to know what Vedas mean, somebody who is making money by performing rituals will tell you Vedas means performing these rituals. A person who is that rituals are very, very important. Very, very important for spiritual life. Just as primary schools are very important. Kindergartens are very important. City college also very important. If you say education should mean only Harvard, Oxford, or Stanford, there'll be nothing possible in this world. You need plenty of schools and colleges and primary schools and kindergartens. We need also places where small children should go and play during the weekend. That is also part of education. But that is not the end of education. So Shankaracharya says the ultimate sense Vedas means Vedas constitute a method, an ideal that takes you beyond the empirical changing phenomenal things that will help you to discover your own true spiritual identity. Now, how do we do that? So, there are 4 great statements in the Vedas. If you ask me the question, can you give this essence of Vedas? 4 Mahavakyas. So Vedas are nothing but 4 Mahavakyas. Each of these Mahavakya means great statement. Let us say fundamental statements. Certain fundamental Vedic statements or expressions. There are only 4 in number. And all the other important statements are attempts to explain, to define, and expand the essence of the Vedic wisdom. What are the 4 statements? For example, in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is one statement. Chandogya Upanishad is from Samaveda. So the statement is this. It is simple. Tattwamasi. Don't ever get away with the impression that Vedas mean only these 4 statements. What I'm telling you is the essence of Vedas are these 4 statements. And these statements are relevant for all people. Wherever people are trying to look for some higher meaning in life, this statement is important. It means the truth that you're seeking, the God, the divine that you're seeking everywhere else, is actually within yourself, within your heart. That is the meaning of this statement. It's called Tattwamasi. Tat means that absolute reality, the transcendental reality that you're looking for, that you're trying to discover, that you're trying to understand, to get a higher meaning of your own life. That is there everywhere. in a temple, in a church, in a synagogue, everywhere it is there. But all temples, all churches, all books, all rituals are important, but the ultimate purpose, where these rituals and books and statements find a fulfillment, is in the discovery that I should manifest the divine presence within me. Then I become a spiritual person. And that divinity, that realization of the inherent divinity of our true identity should express itself in our words, speaking good words, in our acts, in our behavior, in our total personality. Now, this is very universal. You don't have to be a Hindu or a Buddhist or Christian or anyone else to understand this. Anyone can do that. Even an agnostic will realize this real fact. So, Tattwamasi. And to understand, emphasize the point, Tattwamasi is the first Mahavakya, because it is an instruction. A young boy, his name is Swetaketu. He was sent to school by his father, Uddalaka, who is also his teacher. So the son is also actually a disciple of the father, but the father sent him for education elsewhere. After 12 years of education, the boy returns, and the boy is found to be haughty and proud. And then father asked him the question, did you learn that by knowing which everything becomes known? A simple question. Boy didn't understand. He said his teachers did not teach. I mean, as a metaphor, symbolically, what it means, did you actually learn the essence of education, the real essence of education? Education in the higher sense should be spirituality. That is what education finds its fulfillment. Now, after this discussion, and please remember, those who are interested, please listen. Please remember the book Chandogya Upanishad. It is an Upanishad belonging to Samaveda tradition. In its 6th chapter, which has 16 sections, this word of instruction is repeated 8 times. The first instruction comes in the 8th section, and it's repeated in the succeeding sections. Up to 16th section, this is repeated. The boy requests his father to instruct him again and again. So, Saya Esha Anima Aidadatmidam Sarvam Tarsatyam Sa Atma. That reality, which is present everywhere, that is actually your true nature, that is subtle, that is immanent, that is the ultimate truth. And Tattwamasi, that is you yourself. The father did not mean to say you are God or you are Atman or anything, but he means say your own true identity is that all-pervading divine spark, which helps you to look upon entire humanity, entire creation as one spiritual unit, as one spiritual entity. This is the first Mahavakya, great statement. Now, the boy listens to Mahavakya, and he didn't understand immediately the meaning. And the father had to repeat 8 times with 8 different illustrations, which right now we won't go into. Maybe in the future sessions, we will discuss. The father had to repeat 8 times with 8 different illustrations and examples. And in the 16th section, the boy clearly understood the meaning of it and becomes a spiritually enlightened person. This is the first instruction. Now, when you listen to an instruction, you won't understand everything. So you need to practice some repetition. You need to do some of your own homework. There is a gradual process from an information, from an intellectual statement to real experience. After all, we have this overload of information in modern times. So, and information is not very significant. But a great statement of fact as a great intellectual statement has its own significance. But that also falls far short out of real experience. You have to go a long way to travel from an idea to its real experience or its realization. During this interval, you have to do a lot of practice. So for that, there are 4 Mahavakyas. Sorry, there are 3, there are different stages. During this interval, there are certain practices. For that, there are 2 Mahavakyas, which represent your attempt to realize what you have learned. So from instruction to experience. Remember, in Vedantic tradition, first you listen, Sudhi means you listen to the instruction, then you use your own intelligence and rational power, and then you reach the experience level. Shankaracharya himself says, Sutya, Yuktya, Swanubhutya. One should listen, one should learn, then one should use one's own intelligence, rational thinking, and finally he should experience it. Then only you actually become spiritual. So during this interval, there is an evolution taking place. 2 Mahavakyas represent our attempt to translate an instruction into an experience. One is Ayam Atma Brahma. It comes in the Atharva Veda Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad. But please remember, Tattwamasi is from Samaveda. It represents Samaveda. So it's the essence of Samaveda, Chandogya Upanishad. The next Mahavakya, which corresponds to our efforts, our attempts to bridge the gap between instruction and experience. We should transform what we learn into our true experience. So during that time, you have to meditate, Ayam Atma Brahma, that supreme truth within me, that divine truth, the divine spark within me, that's my true identity, that is the universal, omnipresent reality. One should read, one should do meditation, and during that time, you should perform rituals, you should perform meditations, you should also do a lot of philanthropical work, so karma yoga, bhakti yoga, all efforts that help us to evolve in spiritual life. This Mahavakya, it comes from the Atharva Veda Upanishad. Atharva Veda Upanishad is Mandukya and Mundaka. These are from Atharva Veda. So Atharva Veda is represented by Mahavakya, Ayam Atma Brahma. It comes in the Mandukya Upanishad. This immanent divine spark within me, it is the all-pervading reality. Then there is another Mahavakya, which also represents our evolution. It is called Prajnanam Brahma. It comes in the Rig Veda. It is in the Aitareya Upanishad, which is from Rig Veda. It says Prajnanam Brahma. Prajnanetru loka prajna pradishtha Prajnanam Brahma. That supreme reality, that higher intelligence, higher refined intelligence that helps me to experience the supreme truth, which is omnipresent, that helps me to connect with the divine, which is present everywhere, that higher refined spiritual wisdom, that is itself is Brahman. Now, at the end, you reach experience. So remember, there are these stages. Shruti, you hear from a teacher, you learn from a book, then you practice your own meditation, your own slow, gradual evolution. We are going to discuss that elaborately within a few minutes. That stage, the interval between instruction and experience, from instruction to experience, there are two stages of contemplation, meditation, uh, uh, creating more and more self-awareness of what you have actually learned verbally. That is Ayamatma Brahma and Prajnanam Brahma, these two Mahavakyas. Ayamatma Brahma and Prajnanam Brahma. They represent this interval period. This Lakshana Vakya and Siddhartha Vakya that we will discuss later. We will elaborately discuss this. At the end of it, you reach experience. That experience is expressed in the great statement. It is simple, Aham Brahmasmi. That shows, that represents our experience. So, in a way, it is true. You know, what we learned at the beginning, we may hear from a teacher, we may read in a book, we may listen to some talks, and you are immediately struck by the greatness, the grandeur of the great idea. And then gradually we evolve, and finally it becomes our own experience. Those who have got any doubt about this, you can just read. I repeated this again and again in my sessions, the well-known, very little autobiographical work, The Way of a Pilgrim. It is a well-known book. I would say in my acquaintance with the Christian mystical literature, this evolution from an instruction towards experience, that is very graphically portrayed in this book, in the Way of a Pilgrim, where a pilgrim happens to learn about Jesus' prayer from St. Paul's first epistle, from a sermon in a Russian Orthodox Church. It's an autobiographical work from Russian mystical tradition, 19th century, the middle of 19th century, during the Tsarist times, middle of 19th century. So this humble peasant, he learns this, and then he decides to make it a real fact in his life. Then he goes on moving all over the huge landmass of Russia. His plan was to go to Jerusalem, which he of course didn't go eventually. He happened to meet a monk, a Russian Orthodox monk, from whom he learned the Jesus prayer experience, how to remain always in a state of prayerfulness. So you can see, from an instruction to an experience. And this is something you have to remember. Now, this is something very universal. It is not actually in one religion alone you find. We learn a great idea, and finally, when we reach the experience level, there's a long distance that we must have traveled. So it is called Aham Brahmasmi. So Brahmavaidam Agrasi Tadatmanameva Ave. Aham Brahmasmi. It comes in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Aham Brahmasmi is a Mahavakya in the Shukla Yajurveda. Yajurveda has two parts, Shukla Yajurveda and Krishna Yajurveda. Shukla Yajurveda belongs to the Yajnavalkya tradition. This comes in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The first chapter itself, it comes. Aham Brahmasmi. So you learn the instruction, the truth that you're looking for everywhere is within you. And then you evolve. After a long time, through contemplation and practice, you realize, well, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that absolute reality. This experience. These are four Mahavakyas. Now, these four Mahavakyas actually constitute the essence of Vedic literature, or radical Vedanta. Now the question arises, how do we evolve in this process? This is a very important question. So far we have discussed only four important statements called Mahavakyas, which represent the evolution or the journey of the human spirit, journey of every human being in spiritual space, so to speak. Now, this is universal. It is not in one religion or one race and one nationality and one faith system that you find this. for every human being. You can find in the story of the way of a pilgrim, you find. Everywhere you find. Wherever the human soul looks for something transcendental, something beyond empirical, this is how the spiritual journey takes place. Now, with regard to this evolution, the spiritual journey as a whole, there are different views in Vedanta. This is a very important thing to remember. Different views. These views can be divided in two broad categories. Those who are familiar with Vedantic philosophy will know it's called two methods of interpreting the spiritual journey. And this this classification took place during the post-Shankarite times. Remember, it was Shankaracharya who actually built the entire edifice, the whole edifice of Vedanta philosophy around these four Mahavakyas. If you read the Upanishads, and this is something you should remember, if you go to Google, if you go to Wikipedia, whatever may be there, you'll say Upanishads constitute philosophy. Then you read the Chandogya Upanishad and you read the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, you find many stories which are certainly not very universal. So in the Upanishads, you find there are so many statements, not all of them very universal. So Shankaracharya enters the scene. He says, okay, these stories, okay, don't worry about it, but you focus on these four Mahavakyas. So you can imagine practically the whole evolution of human spiritual journey. You can put in your pocket, if you have got a small tiny piece of paper, you can write all these four Mahavakyas. You can write in a tiny piece of paper. Practically the whole philosophy of spirituality is enshrined in these four statements. And remember, you make this statement to anyone, no one can deny the truth of the journey. It is the journey of every human being, not a Hindu, a Christian, or Muslim, or Jew alone. It is actually the story of spiritual journey of man and woman, of course. Now, there are two schools. According to one school of philosophy, they tell you, well, if you read the statement, you immediately get this experience. That is one view. There is an opposite view. They will tell you, no, it doesn't happen. You don't get the spiritual experience if you just listen or if you just imbibe one great statement. It doesn't happen. Now, during the post-Shankarite times, there was a galaxy of great scholars, dialecticians, and philosophers in the Advaitic lineage. They can be divided into three fundamental schools: Vivarana Prasthana, Bhamadi Prasthana, and Vartika Prasthana. Prasthana means a particular school of philosophy. You can say Augustinian school. In Christian theology also you find there are different schools of philosophy. Neoplatonism is a distinct school of philosophy. Sophism is a distinct school of philosophy, like that. So also during the post-Shankarite times, three separate views developed while interpreting the spiritual journey, centering around these four Mahavakyas, four statements. Now, I can tell you interestingly, don't ever believe that this is against temple, because I can tell you, one of the most famous temples in India, one of the most famous temple, which is visited by millions and millions of people every year. It is open only for 4 or 5 months of the year. And during that time, perhaps about 70 or 60 million people visit that day. In that shrine, you know, the statement made, Tattwamasi is the statement. And there's a deity. So God is sitting there, and behind there is writing Tattwamasi. So how do you contradict? How do you explain this? Because every every kind of ritual, every kind of worship, every kind of religious festival is important, is sacred, is very relevant, but it is an important journey. It's a bus or a train that takes you to a destination. It is not destination itself. This is the so if you look at the mantras which are uttered in temples while performing puja, the final mantra actually will tell you, let me be blessed to realize your presence within my own heart. So every worship is actually an act of inviting or invoking the divine energy present everywhere into a symbol, into the picture or image or whatever is in front of you. And finally, you pray to that Lord to enable you to realize that divine spark within your own heart. Now, coming to the subject. So I mentioned there are two fundamentally different schools. One school will tell you that if you just understand this, you can realize this. The other school tells you, no, you need to practice for a long time. Among these, as I mentioned, Vivarana Prasthana and Vartika Prasthana. Vartika Prasthana it follows the tradition of Sureshwaracharya, who wrote Brihadaranya Upanishad Bhashya Vartikam, a super commentary on Shankaracharya's commentary on the Brihadaranya Upanishad. It is called Vartika Prasthana. And the other school is called Vivarana Prasthana. It is also based on the teachings of another disciple of Shankaracharya. His name was Padmapada. He wrote Panchapadika, and Panchapadika was again expanded and commented upon by Prakashat Mayedi. It's called the Panchapadika Vivarana. So around this book also another movement evolved. It's called Vivarana Prasthana. They combine together. So according to them, if you just listen, you get that experience. That's what they say, Vivarana Prasthana. Actually, many of the prominent Shankaracharya mats of India, like Sringeri, they all follow also Vivarana Prasthana. Now, how do you explain this? Suppose they tell you that if you just have what you call Sravanavati, means if you just listen from a teacher, immediately it becomes a matter of your experience. But all these views have their justifications in Shankaracharya's commentaries. This is based on Shankaracharya's views. So they will tell you, if you just listen, for example, Tattwamayananda, immediately it becomes your experience. So the truth is that if a person has already attained all spiritual qualifications that make him fit for the highest spiritual experience, and then if he listens, it becomes naturally, it transforms into an experience. So this is a simple thing. Suppose you have been practicing meditation, reading higher books, practicing unselfishness, leading a pure life for a long time. Your mind has reached such a high level of purity and spiritual fitness. And then if you just go to listen to somebody, listen to a teacher, seriously instructing, immediately you will understand the truth of that instruction. Because the land is fertile. So, and it is properly irrigated. You removed all the weeds and grass from the soil. And accidentally, if somebody sows some seed, it sprouts, it becomes a plant, it becomes a tree. So that's an important thing. Actually, this example you can find in Saint Teresa of Avila. Saint Teresa of Avila herself used this parable. Okay, you can find a sower of the seed in the New Testament also. You find. So in Vedanta, it is called Adhikarivada, means the concept of fitness. So a person who is already endowed with sadhana sadhushtaya sampatti, that is nityanitya vastu vivega ihamutra bhala bhoga viraga samadhi sukha sampatti mumukshutva, a sense of discerning wisdom between what is real and what is unreal, and a sense of renunciation of what is unreal, upholding to what is real, and then a sense of self-restraint and self-control, and a strong urge for spiritual enlightenment. If a person has got all these qualities, then he goes and reads a book. It will create deep impression on him. Actually, we are able to remember, we are able to practice an idea only when we are actually ready for it. It's just a matter of our own readiness and fitness. So according to Vivarana Prasthana, if you are ready, if you're fully qualified, then a single instruction will be enough. It's something like this. Suppose you are driving a car every day from San Francisco to Sacramento. Every day you drive. You are very familiar with the route. You know every inch of the route you're driving. And somebody asks you a question about a shop or a place along the route, you will immediately able to recollect. If somebody explains to you about something, a building or a shop or something on the way, along the route, if somebody tells you, you don't have to struggle hard to locate in your mind the exact place that's being mentioned. Like that, see, look at Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna did not require a lot of preparations, lot of practices. His guru Totapuri just instructed him the Mahavakya, Tattwamasi. Immediately Sri Ramakrishna immersed into Samadhi. Aham Brahmasmi became instantly his experience. Why? Because Sri Ramakrishna was, from his birth itself, he was doing nothing but doing spiritual practices, performing spiritual disciplines, reading, listening to scriptures, doing puja, doing meditation. He was breathing spirituality. He was thinking spirituality. He was living in spirituality. So such a person, he became his whole mind was absorbed in spirituality. So when Sri Ramakrishna was given instruction by Totapuri, instantly it became a matter of experience. So Tattwamasi immediately were transformed into Aham Brahmasmi experience. Because just like I mentioned to you, you're driving every day up and down from San Francisco to Sacramento. Then somebody has to teach you about a place along the route. You don't need much instruction. Immediately you'll understand. So it means, that's called Vivarana Prasthana. This is very important because this is more of an academic program. So I would like to mention these technical terms, but I shall try to explain in detail. And if there are some Sanskrit words which I mention, which I quote, which you are not able to completely understand during the lecture, you are most welcome. And I shall be much obliged if you can raise, and I should be happy to explain during the interaction session. The other school is called Bhamadi Prasthana. So Bhamadi Prasthana, Bhamadi is a name of a work, a commentary on Shankaracharya's commentary on Brahma Sutras. It is called Bhamati. It's a great, actually, it may be of interest for us to remember the sublime lineage of Advaita Vedanta. The author is called Vajaspati. Vajaspati Misra was the name of was the author who wrote Bhamati. So he was a married man. Now he was completely devoted to Advaita philosophy, teaching, writing, and instructing. That was a typical scholar of those times. He married. It so happened that he married. But feminists should not raise a word of objection to this. But the story is so beautiful. The story of an ideal husband and ideal wife. Together, they made a great contribution to the sublime spiritual philosophy of Advaita. So Vajaspati had already started writing his Tiga, it's called commentary on Shankaracharya's, on commentary on Brahma Sutra, it's called Bhamadi. Anyway, so he had not given that name. He was writing. After marriage also, he continued writing. So he had become quite old, and the book was reaching its completion. So one day it was evening, he was writing, and the lamp was about to, it is flickering. There's not enough oil in the lamp. So he found an old woman was coming and pouring oil in the lamp to keep it alive. And he looked at, he found it was his own wife, whom he married years ago. He had forgotten everything else. The lady also was equally great. She found her husband was writing a great philosophical spiritual classic. So she thought it was a privilege for her to be part of that endeavor. And by helping him, by taking care of everything, she also became a partner in this holy task of writing a spiritual philosophical classic. And this man, suddenly a few drops of tears fell down his eyes, because he found he had completely forgotten his obligation of matrimonial life. Then she said, I shall make you immortal by giving your name to this book which I'm going to write. And remember, Bhamadi is one of the outstanding immortal dialectical work in Vedantic tradition. After Shankaracharya's own works, in the next category, this is one of the most wonderful classical work. It's called Bhamadi Tika. So Bhamadi was the name of the wife whose name was immortalized by her husband, who recognized her true greatness, because without her cooperation, he would not have been able to complete such a gigantic spiritual intellectual process. This is Bhamadi Tika. No, so the school of Bhamadi, again, it was followed, it was commented upon by another great scholar. His name was Amalananda, and he wrote a commentary, Kalpataru. And then another great scholar, his name was Payadikshita, who wrote Parimala. So Bhamadi, Kalpataru, Parimala. These three together, these works constitute a huge, wonderful edifice of dialectical, philosophical, classical literature in Advaita tradition. According to Bhamadi school, that's we are going to discuss now. According to their views, you do not realize if you just listen. You have to practice a lot, and you have to increase your own spiritual fitness to really understand the implications of what you learned. So they will tell you, the technical name is Sravanavritti. You go on listening, and then you will get only intellectual knowledge, Paroksha Jnanam. Paroksha Jnanam will eventually becomes Aparoksha Jnanam through a process of meditation, Karma Yoga, and different spiritual disciplines. And then eventually you reach the highest spiritual enlightenment. You realize the implication of the Mahavakya. Mahavakya should be always, it's an important term. Maha means great, Vakya means statement. So the four Vedas can be compressed into four simple, brief statements. Tattwamasi, Ayamatma Brahma, Prajnanam Brahma, and finally the experience Aham Brahmasmi. So according to Vajaspati and his school of philosophers, they will tell you that by just listening alone, you do not get experience. You need to go through a process of spiritual disciplines. It's called the prasankhya. Prasankhya means dhyana abhyasa, practicing meditation. Suppose you are wonderfully impressed by a great teacher, and you want to experience it. You are very sincere, and you go on contemplating on the meaning of the statement. Slowly, if your mind is completely absorbed, in the contemplation on the meaning of the statement, then that will also influence your whole life. Your thoughts, words, and deeds all will be influenced, will be colored by the great thought that's going on in your mind. You're concentrating on this great statement. If you chant some devotional hymns, for example, in any tradition, suppose mentally you are chanting a devotional hymn. The Christians will psalms, or the Hindus. There are wonderful devotional poems in Hindu tradition. Many of our temples we chant beautiful, wonderful slokas and stotras and kirtanas, bhajans. If you mentally contemplate on the meaning of these, even if you do not fully understand the meaning, still, if you do that, slowly you find the meaning will slowly start entering into your mental system. And that will, so if people chant these great mantras and slogas and these devotional hymns, that influences their life. That brings them peace of mind, serenity, because when you go on listening to beautiful, wonderful mantras and devotional poetry, which contain great ideas, they cannot fail to bring your mind into a state of serenity, peace, and a kind of inner contentment. That's why we enjoy listening to great music. We enjoy chanting, reciting chandi or other stotras. We repeat these different mantras because they get a peace of mind. Why? Because those sound symbols, mantras are influencing your thoughts, your mind, your emotions, feelings, and they sublimate, they refine, they purify our emotions and feelings and thought currents. So slowly you understand the true meaning of it because you begin to evolve. The dhyana abhyasa means prasankhana. In the broad sense, what it means, contemplating on the meaning of it. And that will naturally help us to practice karma yoga, to practice unselfishness, to practice contentment and purity of life. So this is one view. Both views are actually correct. Why? If you are really fit, you will immediately get the experience. I give the example of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna just listened once to Mahavakya from his Guru Totapuri. Instantly, it became an experience. On the other hand, those who don't belong to that category, normal spiritual aspirants who are doing a lot of work, they may be doing the office work, they're engaged in so many other activities. They may not be able to spend a whole lifetime and energy for spiritual disciplines. For them, every day, a little, if they practice slowly, that practice will deepen the spiritual aspirations, and that will help them to reach experience level. So from instruction to experience, from Sruti to Anubhuti. This is the evolution for Mahavakyas. So you first listen Tattwamasi. I mentioned earlier, in the Chandogya Upanishad, Uddalaka had to repeat 8 times. First, he gave an instruction. Then the same instruction, he repeated 8 times. And his son, Shvetaketu, his disciple, requested him again and again, please repeat again. You see, Bhuya eva ma bhagavan vijñāpayatu iti tata somya iti hovacha. Please repeat once more. But actually, every time when the boy received his instruction, he repeated this request to repeat again. And each time the teacher instructed with an additional example or a parable. One of the parables is very, very famous. It is something very interesting. With that, we'll conclude. That parable comes in the 14th Khanda, 14th section of the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad, which again, please remember, it belongs to the Samaveda tradition. So that particular section is called, Gandhara Purusha Drishtanta, it is called. Abhinadhaksha Purusha Drishtanta. What it means is the example, the parable of the blindfolded man. That is the meaning. The example or the parable of the blindfolded man. That story brings in the essence of this evolution of spiritual journey from instruction to experience. This is something very interesting. So once it so happened, in ancient times, a man was in India for a long time. After receiving Vedic education, he was returning to his hometown. The hometown is called Gandhara, which corresponds to today's Kandahar in Afghanistan. This is part of a very, very famous part of ancient Vedic tradition. The Vedas were very much prevalent in ancient time. Punjab and Haryana and Afghanistan, all these places, today's Pakistan included. All these geographical regions were the cradle of Vedic civilization once upon a time. Later, of course, Buddhism also became very prominent in Afghanistan. So anyway, that's a different story. So the story goes like this. Remember, this is in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Sorry, it is in the Chandogya Upanishad, Samaveda, in the Chandogya Upanishad. The parable of the blindfolded man is called Gandhara Purusha Drishtanta, or the parable of the man from Kandahar. Abhinadhaksha means somebody who's Abhinadhaksha Purusha Drishtanta, so the parable of the man who was blindfolded. He was in India, he was returning to his hometown in Kandahar, and on the way he was ambushed. He was ill-treated, and all his properties were taken away from him by a group of robbers, and then he was dragged into a thick forest and was tied to a tree. And the robbers went their way. Now, after some time, this man began to shout and cry, I was ambushed, I was ill-treated, my property was stolen by robbers and tied to a tree in this thick forest. He began to shout. And a compassionate pedestrian traveler was traveling along the same route. He heard this noise, cries coming from the thick forest. He entered the thick forest. He untied the ropes and brought this man to the main road, then told him, you take this road and you can go back to your hometown. So this compassionate traveler who was familiar with the route entered the thick forest and untied his ropes and removed his blindfold and brought him to the main road and instructed him how to get back to his hometown. This is a story. Now, in this story, the whole story is now taking a different meaning. What it means, this traveler, the spiritual seeker, spiritual aspirants, and he was robbed by his own desires, his own worldly desires, worldly instincts. Then he was left in the thick forest, blindfolded. He had become ignorant of his true identity. He did not know how to get back to his hometown. So what should he do? If he keeps quiet, no one will come to his rescue. He'll be in trouble. So he had to make a lot of noise. So every spiritual seeker should make a lot of noise. How do we make noise? Go to the library, read the Upanishads, read some spiritual books. At least read, I would say, Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman. That's something good beginning. Because that will help you to think of something beyond the empirical world of, everyday life problems. So somehow we should develop a higher perspective of life. So we should make some noise. Making noise means it is called, a kind of healthy restlessness, spiritually healthy. Go to the one book, read some great book and discuss with somebody. That's the beginning of spiritual journey for many spiritual seekers, actually. And then finally, you may meet somebody who can give you some clear instructions. But when you receive instructions, you should have your own intelligence, your own ability, your reasoning power. So Shankaracharya has written a very wonderful, beautiful commentary. It's a graphic story of our spiritual journey. He says, we are blindfolded, so we should make a lot of noise. Then somebody will come and take away the blindfold, will lead us away from the thick forest, bring us to the main road. Then, Edandasam Gacha, go this way, you can get back to your hometown. Then as we walk in that direction, we may be tempted to look in this direction or that direction. We may be tempted by worldly enjoyments or amusements. There may be a beautiful garden, maybe some wonderful sweet mango somewhere. So I would rather go and eat some mangoes instead of continuing my journey. You should not do that. So we should have steadiness. So Pandido Medhavi, like that, Shankaracharya writes in his commentary. He should have the ability to remember what instruction he has received, and then he should have the power to remember, to retain in his mind Medhavi, and should have a sense of proportions, sense of discerning wisdom. Then only he will speak, he will reach spiritual journey. So you can imagine a single phrase, Tat Tum Asi, 3 words. The entire chapter, 6th chapter, is built around this statement. In the story, you find the beginning of the first section, Khanda. Uddalaga comes home, and he had already left his child somewhere for education. The child returns. Uddalaga asks him some questions. The child, suppose somebody who had, say, school boy has returned home with some high grade, and the father asks him some questions. The child doesn't show much modesty or politeness. So the father asks him, did you do enough? Did you learn this thing, that thing? A good, compassionate father will ask him. The child suddenly finds that he has a lot of things yet to learn. That's how the story begins. All these stories are maybe of contemporary relevance, very relevant for those times. But Tattwamasi statement is relevant for our times, because if you read the experience level of that statement, that when you reach Aham Brahmasmi, then you can look upon the entire humanity as one spiritual family. You don't quarrel with anyone, you don't fight with anyone. You look upon entire humanity, entire creation as one spiritual family. Now, this message comes from the Vedanta. Shankaracharya says, these ideas constitute the essence of the Vedas. So that's why he mentioned, the definition of Vedas, his statement, Brahmadhinam Paramatmanam Labhanta iti Veda. That is the definition. Vedas will teach you the truth of Brahman, the all-pervading reality. I mean, the whole creation is one spiritual family. So universal, so important. So, why these ideas are important in our time? There are many people who will tell you Vedas are coconut bush stories, and there are so many things. And you can find in the mythological books so many things. They are not very, very important. That's why Vyasa Smriti makes a statement. Sudhi Smriti Purananam Virodho Yatra Dushyade Tatra Sraudam Pramanam Syat Tayodvaithe Smritirvara. Sruti, Smriti, Puranas. 3 levels of canonical literature. Sruti means Vedanta. And in Vedanta itself, the essence, these 4 Mahavakyas. They take you towards the realization of your own spiritual identity, so universal. If this idea is not properly represented, or if some of these ideas in the Smritis, law books, and mythological books, Puranas, do not correctly represent or reflect this universal spiritual ideal, then Vyasa himself says, don't take my own smriti seriously. And so the Vyasa himself admits. No, I have to, of course, now suddenly I remember one important thing. There were some questions raised in the comment section by some friends who listened to my previous lecture, that is second lecture, the third one. So one question somebody raised was this: what about Vyasa? Because in my previous classes on Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which are again recorded like this, we discussed very elaborately. We discussed Vyasa's commentary on Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So, and we are still speaking about Vyasa. Who is this Vyasa and who was the other Vyasa? So somebody raised this question. So the answer is this. So we have to remember there are innumerable Vyasas mentioned in our spiritual philosophical lineage. It's not the same person. The one who classified Vedas into four groups, four categories: Nirugveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and the Atharvaveda. That Vyasa was an ancient Vedic sage. And all Vyasa mentioned in the Bhagavata Purana as perhaps the same Vyasa. But the commentator called Bhashyakara of Patanjali Yoga system is a different Vyasa. So, Sve Patanjalim Vyasam Shankaram Chamunitrayam Kartru Sutrasya Bhashyasya Krama Vivaranasya. The Munitrayam of the yoga tradition. So, Bhashyakara, the one who wrote a commentary on Patanjali Yoga Sutras, that Vyasa is a later figure, relatively. He lived closer to, maybe perhaps around 900 BC or so, but the Vyasa who classified the Vedas was a much more ancient teacher. This is an important point, remember. Another question that was raised in the comment section was something like this about hierarchy. So I mentioned there is no hierarchy. So then we have the Ramanuja tradition, Shankaracharya tradition, Madhva tradition, Vallabhacharya, Nimbarka, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and so many lineages. Remember, when I mentioned that there is no hierarchy in Hindu tradition or Indian philosophical tradition, what I meant was there is not a single church who decides this alone is right, that alone that is wrong. That kind of personal hierarchy doesn't exist. Hierarchies are the different lineages out there, but no one can tell you that you are wrong because you are not worshipping God in this specific fashion. Absolutely, no one can tell. That kind of hierarchical rigidity is totally absent in the tradition. That's why so many deities, so many different forms of worship developed in India, because this is a huge country, could not as geographically certainly much smaller than America, but demographically it's a huge population, diverse cultural traditions, 23 different language systems. So if we include other dialects, there are any number of language speech systems in India, which some of them with rich ancient literary tradition. So it's such a very diverse culture. So many different types of ideas of God and methods of worship evolved. In fact, Swami Vivekananda makes an interesting statement in this context. Maybe in light-hearted sense, it's better for everyone to have his own or her own God. What it means is we create our idea of God depending upon our own spiritual evolution. My idea of God will very much depend upon my own spiritual evolution. A primitive person will think my God is sitting here. He is in very good terms with me. And he's certainly not in very good terms with others. So I should fight with the other tribe. And if I can conquer the other tribe, then my God also will conquer the other God. This sort of tribal warfare took place in ancient times. So that sort of thing is totally inconceivable in Hindu tradition. In that sense, there is not a single man-made structure that decides that this is right and that is wrong. No. If A is right, it doesn't mean that B should be wrong. B also can be right. C also can be right in different respects, different areas. All can be so many roads, ultimately leading to the same spiritual goal of our own self-realization or self-discovery, spiritual enlightenment, as mentioned. So thank you very much. Now we can have interaction. You are most welcome with questions. Thank you. Namaskar.
I have several questions, Swamiji. So in the scriptures, you said there is Shruti, Smriti, Purana. What about Itihasa? Where does that belong? Then these three schools of philosophy, you say they are called Prasthana. So I just wondering, what is the significance of the word Prasthana? And I missed. You said Vivara Prasthana is the one which says that after the sadhana Chatushtayam are fulfilled, the receiving the Mahavakya from the Guru results. What about the Bhartika Prasthana, Swamiji?
Yeah, I mentioned so. First of all,
and what are the Shankara Matas? Which one do they follow? So?
Yeah, Vivarana Prasthana, the Vivarana Prasthana and Vartika Prasthana, where the Sureshwaracharya's tradition, they merged. Padmapada is, Padma Panchapadya and Panchapadya Vivarana Prakasha Medi, Vivarana Prasthana. And then Sureshwaracharya Abhasavada, we could say, Vartika Prasthana. He wrote this Brihadaranya Upanishad Bhashya Vartika. So there are only minor differences between Abhasavada and Vivarana school. So they both merged more or less, and they both accept this one particular term which I did not use. Anyway, you raised it. It is called Shabda Aparokshvada, which means if you are spiritually fit, because sadhana sadushta sampatti, if you have already got all the essential spiritual qualifications, then even if you listen, it's called Sravanavarti. I mean, if you just listen, do Sravana, proper Sravana to Mahavakyas, immediately it will lead to Aparokshanubhuti. Aparokshanubhuti means the immediate transcendental experience. So, Aparoksha that is the ultimate goal, Jiva Brahma Aikya. So that happens if you just listen. I give the example of Siddhartha, and I also give the example of somebody driving up and down every day from Sacramento to San Francisco and back and forth. Now, the point is, if a person is already immersed in spiritual disciplines, his mind is so much evolved, if he just listens, immediately it strikes him as a fact of experience. That's what happens. As in, again, you have to give the example of driving. If you're driving every day for years, then no one needs to tell you, no one needs to instruct you for a very long time. You don't have to look at the Google when somebody tells you on the way along this road, there is such a place where you stop maybe for having a cup of coffee or tea or something like that. You immediately will remember that restaurant, whatever it is. So, because you are so familiar. Like that, Sri Ramakrishna was the whole lifetime, he was practicing meditation, puja, contemplation. He was immersed in spiritual disciplines. So when Totapuri just instructed him, it became experience. Shankara Digvijayas also mentioned, some Shankara Digvijayas mentioned that Shankaracharya had the same experience when Govinda Bhagavad Pada instructed him Mahavakya, Sravana, Mahavakyam Sravana. It is called Shabda Aparokshawada, means instant enlightenment. In the Mandukya Kairiga Bhashya, Shankaracharya writes very elaborately about this. It means Sravana itself is enough. Sravana means, literally means listening. But here it means you are already immersed. You are already immersed in spirituality. And you already know it intellectually. Because by your own evolution, you are understood. If somebody tells you, it becomes just a confirmation, like a revision. This is one. This is the view, and the prominent mutts of Shankaracharya mostly follow Shabda Aparaksha. The other one is called the Prasankhyanavada. Prasankhyanā means dhyana abhyasa. You continuously practice meditation, karma yoga, puja, all this. Necessary, it's important. How? Because what you listened to, what you heard, you want to go deeper and deeper into what you heard. You contemplate on the meaning of what you heard, and along with that, you also practice a lot of contemplation, meditation. And one day, eventually, you get Shabda, you reach this Aparokshanubhuti. But it's a gradual process. This view was held by Bhamadi school. So Bhamadi is a tika that I explained in detail. It's on Shankaracharya's Brahma Sutra Bhashya. And then, so they believe in Tattvamasi Sravanam and Sravanavarti, then Parokshajnanam, then Aparokshajnanam. That is their evolution, their method. That's a Parimalakara, Parimala, that is Apayadikshita and Kalpataru, Amalananda, they all follow this Bhamadi school, very prominent school. Bhamadi is important because the work itself is unique in many ways and needs a teacher to guide you at every point. You cannot just read like a novel. You need a lot of knowledge of logic and a lot of background. It's one of the most wonderful dialectical works during the post-Shankarite period in the Advaitic tradition. Okay, unique work. So the Bhamadi school is, in a way, in reality, there is no difference. Bhamadi school tells you that if you don't have sadhana sadhushtaya sampatti, if you have not attained all the necessary qualifications, then after listening, after savana, you go on contemplating, meditating, and performing karma yoga and rituals. Slowly, you increase your fitness. You increase your fitness. When you reach the higher level of fitness, immediately becomes
establishing sadhana chatushtayam. You are establishing sadhana chatushtayam later on.
You get more and more established in sadhana chatushtaya sampatti through this prasankhyanā. But in the Shabda Aparoksha concept, Shabda Aparoksha or the Vivarana concept, they are talking about those who are fully qualified. Yeah. So practically the same. It is the same. There is no real difference. But philosophers want some difference. The glory of India's philosophical heritage was people were actually fighting over this. Oh, you believe this? In fact, see, it's just the grandeur, the sublime, the sublimity of a culture where you discuss all these transcendental matters. Whether you should meditate or you should not meditate. You can imagine how profound, how sublime, how beautiful such a intellectual culture should be. That's the greatness of it. In Western tradition, unfortunately, during the post-Augustinian period, people mostly lost the habit of fighting intellectually for a good cause. You can imagine Neoplatonism during the post-Socrates period. They produced great thinkers, Porphyry, Philo, Plato, and others. The beauty and the charm, the sublimity of intellectual fights, having a big discussion. In Vedic tradition, it's called a Parishad, assembly of great Pandits, coming together in a court and discussing philosophy and logic. If you do that more and more in today's world, in this overload of information and the short attention span, if you can think of these great books and fight over No, this is the idea that itself can take us to different, higher spiritual culture. Because philosophy takes you closer to spirituality. It is not it's an alternative to spirituality. Remember, philosophy itself need no philosophy in the proper sense of the term. It's not an alternative to spirituality, but it takes you away from the mundane empirical level and helps you to think of something less dangerous, less troublesome. That's the point. If a Kantian and utilitarian engage in some kind of a intellectual dialogue in modern times, it's wonderful. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, thank you. You can imagine the glorious period of America during the Transcendentalists. You can imagine Emerson's journals, his ideas. The Walden, in Henry Thoreau, in Walden, a small book, he talks about so many things, the glory and the beauty, the charm of trees and mountains and ponds and, and the intuition of the modern technologies, including to this space of the animals and forests. So it's a different world. That's the idea behind.
Oh, you want one quick follow-up. The epics, Ramayana, Mahabharata, they are part of Itihasa, they are not part of Purana. Right?
They're the Itihasa.
Yeah.
Part history, part mythology. Of course, modern excavations reveal that Ramayana and Mahabharata are not just myths. They do have a historical background, but of course, there is a mythological aspect also. After all, they are literary classics.
If you could place the Itihasa along with the Shruti Smriti Purana.
Yeah, Itihasa, sometimes they are included as a subcategory of Puranas.
Purana, okay.
Yeah. Certainly not Smritis. But there are statements in these classics which are more like Smritis, but they are not part of the traditional Smriti literature. Smriti Dharma Shastra, they get together, mostly deal with do's and don'ts and constitutional things, how Vaidika Dharma was practiced in those days at different levels of society, among kings and monks and householders and novitiates, like that. So, Drupadharma, Rajadharma, all these things. So, very different. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Namaste, Maharaj. Thank you for the wonderful clarification today. My question is on the two things that were reverberating throughout the lecture today is creating that fertile ground and also the concept of shouting out. You talked about Gandhara example. So my question to you is, can you give us those references on what to read from Shankaracharya to create that fertile ground and to enhance our knowledge? And if I may add my own reflection, maybe there is a separate time I need to have conversation, is you also mentioned the importance of rituals. Rituals and chanting, for my own journey, it has helped understand your lectures much better. It has purified me. My ground has got fertile. So my more question is first on the pointers from Shankaracharya, the books to read. Second, any more guidance on creating that fertile ground for better understanding. Those are my questions.
Yeah, Shankaracharya refers to sadhana sadhushta samrati, the 4 important qualifications, and sravana, manana, nididhyasana. I mean, reading scriptures with meaning and contemplating the meaning of the scriptural statements, and of course, meditative practices. So all these are clearly explained in one small book, Viveka Chudamani. During the early part of Viveka Chudamani, you find Ado Nitya Vastu Viveka Parigadnide, like that. It begins it. He defines what is Saddha, what is Mokshutam, I mean, urge for spiritual enlightenment. All these are very clearly what is meaning of Shama, Dhamma. All these are very clearly clarified, defined, and explained in the Viveka Chudamani. And also, if you are interested, you can read the Bhashya on the 14th Khanda, 14th section of the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad, where this example of the blindfolded man, Gandhara Purusha, the man who came from Kandahar. It comes there, and in his bhashya he says, this man is shouting, he is blindfolded, he's tied to a tree in a thick forest. He says, look at me, I'm left alone here, all my things are taken away, and I'm blindfolded. Now, the blindfold, the ropes with which they tied him to a tree, and the forest itself, the journey, the travel, all these have their counterparts in our real life. A traveler is a normal spiritual seeker. The forest is this world, this life, worldly life of problems and challenges. And the blindfold and all these are our own karmas, vasanas, vritti, samskaras, and so on. So, like that, a person should develop a strong spiritual urge, like the man who was shouting. And so somebody heard. If he had kept quiet, nobody would have heard him. He would have remained there and perished in the thick forest. So he shouted. Like that, we must also develop a healthy restlessness, a healthy, Parinama Dukkha, it is called a Yoga Sutra. It means an ability to sublimate our sense of imperfection to something higher, which becomes transformative. Parinama means transformative. If we can worry about something higher, that worry itself will take us to a higher life. If we can just lift our level of concerns and worries and anxieties to a higher level, that will help us in a spiritual life. That's one. They get rituals, you mentioned. That is very important. Actually, you can even scientifically prove, if you constantly listen to some higher ideas, even if you keep a record of some devotional poetry or any chanting of Om or any tradition, what they consider to be holy, that cannot fail to influence the way you think, the way you act, the way you behave, really speaking. So also when you perform rituals like puja, we do with great concentration, great attention. That kind of focusing our entire mental energy on something that we consider a secret, that itself has a sublime impact on a personality. We see, when you perform ritual or when you participate in ritual, you attach a special kind of sanctity and sacredness to that. That if you attach a kind of sanctity and sacredness, that will influence the way we think, the way we act. After that, when you return to your apartment, you feel a state inner serenity and calmness, quietude. It is something very precious in these modern times. A sense of sanctity and sacredness and meaningfulness. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sriram. You had more questions.
Yeah.
There is a question from YouTube, Maharaj Elas.
Yeah.
What part of Mahabharata and Ramayana do you find is a myth?
The highest and the most sublime part of Mahabharata is Bhagavad Gita itself. There are other parts which are called Gita, Vyadha Gita, another famous poem, which is highly philosophical. Bhagavad Gita is the zenith, the peak of Mahabharata. Mahabharata is again, is part history, part mythology, and part ethics. It has everything in it. Ramayana also contains many great teachings, Rama's instructions to Lakshmana, All these are very important things. Yeah.
There are no more questions. On
Yeah,
YouTube.
thank you. Thank you. So thank you so much for this discussion. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Thank you, everyone.